My name is Hilda. I am 60 years old, and 3 days ago my son and his wife tried to kill me. The wind on the ridge was colder than the sky had any right to be. It moved across the cliff face in sudden, sly gusts that stole the warmth from my fingers and carried away every word that wasn't nailed down by terror. Below us, the valley opened like a green, breathing lung. Above us, the sun was a white coin someone had pressed into the blue. "Just a little farther," Melissa called, her voice wrapped in a bright ribbon of excitement. "The view is perfect up here." I remember thinking how carefully she smiled when she said perfect, how it didn't touch her eyes. Henry's hand, worn and warm, squeezed mine. We were both out of breath. We were not hikers. We were grandparents who took slow loops around the park on Sunday evenings. Still, we followed them along the narrow shelf of rock toward the overlook, a neat rectangle of stone where the world fell away and, if you were careless, you could fall with it. Melissa lifted her camera, framing us against the glittering thread of the river. "Hug," she chirped, stepping closer to the edge. "One for the anniversary album." We obeyed. 40 years stitched together in a single embrace. I felt the thud of Henry's heart against my shoulder, the life we had earned, the gentle weight of time that had softened our edges and silvered our hair. "One more," Damien said. His tone was casual, almost affectionate, almost. He drifted behind us like a shadow that had learned to speak. "Just step back a little, Mom. I want more of the valley." One step back was all it took to see what he wanted. The stone under my heel crumbled. The distance behind us became a mouth opening for a final bite. I looked at my son, at the boy I had bandaged and birthday caked and forgiven 1,000 small trespasses. The boy who in this moment wasn't a boy at all. His expression had shed its mask. There it was, the cold, precise intent that turns a person into a stranger while you are still saying their name. "Smile," Melissa said. Her finger hovered over the shutter button, and the sun slid across the glass of her lens like a blade. Time dilated into something thin and fragile. Henry's breath hitched. I felt the pressure at my back hands, sudden and decisive. The world snapped, and gravity took us. The sky swung. The valley leapt upward. My body left my life like a bird startled from a branch. Falling is louder than you think. The air itself screams. Rocks rush past in a hard, gray blur. Somewhere in that chaos I heard Damien curse, Melissa yell his name, and Henry shout something I couldn't catch until everything ended in one merciless, shattering impact. The ground rose into me, unforgiving as a verdict. Pain detonated in white-hot shocks. Ribs, shoulder, a ringing burst inside my skull that turned the world into a tunnel. For a beat, or 100, there was only the clatter of pebbles finishing their descent and the stutter of my own ragged breaths. "Hilda." Henry's voice found me through the static, thin and frayed but unmistakably his. "Don't move." A breath. Another. "Play dead." Those 2 words were a rope dropped into a well. I clung to them. I forced my chest to quiet, my eyelids to settle into the heavy stillness of a body that has surrendered. Every instinct howled to gasp, to groan, to reach for him. I did none of those things. I became stone. A broken whimper floated across the rocks. Melissa. Damien, my leg, I think. Oh God. There was a scrape, the slow, ugly sound of someone dragging themselves inch by inch. Then Damien, my son, answered in a voice that braided pain with fury. "Just move. We need to think." His breathing was harsh, close, then farther. Pebbles popped beneath his palms as he crawled. A shadow crossed my face. I kept my eyes half-lidded, unfocused, a puppet abandoned mid-performance. Damien hovered. I felt him studying me, his mother, coolly, clinically. The way you study a locked door you've already decided to kick open. He bent near enough that the heat of his breath warmed my cheek. "They're dead," he called to Melissa after a long measuring pause. "Both of them." Silence spread, sudden and sweet as water. I didn't drink it. I stayed still. "Perfect," Melissa whispered, relief loosening her tongue until it slipped. "It worked." Her voice broke on a short, breathy laugh that curdled something inside me. "Except for us tumbling, too." "Shut up," Damien hissed. But he didn't sound frightened, only angry that the choreography hadn't been pristine. He shifted again, nearer to Henry. I felt the air move over my husband's body. Felt, rather than heard, Henry's answer. the steadiness of a man who has decided to live long enough to tell a story. "Okay," Damien said after a while, calmer. "We get to higher ground. We call it in." Same story we rehearsed. He spoke the word rehearsed like a foreman checking a blueprint. Rock gave way under Dad. He grabbed Mom. Tragic accident. We fell trying to help. Melissa murmured agreement. The cadence of it, practiced, polished. "Traumatized survivors," she added, almost academically. "We stick to it." They began to crawl, a slow duet of grunts and grit and petty complaints. Their voices thinned as they climbed, then thinned further, until the gorge held only the hush of wind and the small, stubborn sounds of two old hearts that had not yet given up. "Still with me?" Henry breathed. I risked the tiniest answer. "Yes." "What hurts?" "Everything." I counted my pieces without moving. A fire along my right arm, a barbed wire cinched around my ribs, the dizzy swell of a head wound. But my legs answered when I commanded them not to twitch. My lungs obeyed the cruel discipline of shallow breaths. I was alive enough to pretend to be dead. It would have to do. Above us, a bird skimmed the air, its shadow skittering across the stone like a warning. I tasted iron. I tasted dust. Somewhere far off, water threaded through rocks, patient as time. In that narrow seam between agony and will, memory arrived unbidden. The first crib Henry built, the oak table he carved, Richard's laugh in the kitchen, Damien at 5, sticky with jam, reaching for my hand. All of it pressed against the vision of his face at the cliff, the subtraction of love from his eyes. "Listen," Henry whispered, each syllable a wince. "They'll come back with help. We can't move until we know who's here. When they think we're gone, we'll have the only thing that matters." "What?" "The truth," he said. "And proof." The word proof struck like a small, bright bell. It cut a clean line through the fog. Proof meant Henry had been carrying more than fear up that mountain. Proof meant this story could still be wrestled back from the edge. The idea steadied me. A minute, 10, an hour. Time lost its edges and pooled. The sun slid a fraction. Ants discovered the torn skin at my elbow and investigated like tiny coroners. I let them. I let everything be exactly what it needed to be. Convincing. Then, thin as thread at first, the sound came. Voices above, urgent and official. The clank of hardware. The clipped language of people who know how to descend into danger and bring strangers out. A helicopter's thrum rolled over the ridge and echoed down the stone throat of the gorge. "Hold," Henry breathed. I held. Ropes hissed. Boots scraped. A beam of light touched my face, retreated, returned. A gloved hand hovered at my throat. Finding the faint flutter of a pulse I was careful not to offer too eagerly. "We've got 2 at the bottom," someone called up. Voice steady, trained. Male with shallow but present respirations. Female barely there. "We need medevac." "Barely there." "Good. Let me be almost," I prayed. "Let me be almost long enough to become entirely." "Ma'am?" The rescuer's voice bent close, gentle as a palm. "If you can hear me, don't move. We're going to get you out." If you can hear me, I heard him. I heard everything. I also heard the faintest drift of the rehearsed grief from above the shape of Melissa's sobs, Damien's hoarse answers, and beneath those the steady click of a machine that had just turned on inside my husband, a recorder, a witness, a second memory we could hand to the world. "Play dead," Henry had said. I did. And for the first time that day, the choice felt like life. The hospital light was too clean, too white, like it wanted to wash away the blood still beating inside my head. I lay in the bed, my body bound in splints and gauze, my mind in a storm that wouldn't quiet. Henry was in the room next to mine, alive but fragile, his breaths tethered to machines that hummed and clicked, like a chorus of impatient clocks. For a time, I listened to those sounds and tried to convince myself we had survived. But survival doesn't mean safety. Every hour stretched long and thin, and in each one, I expected to see Damien's face slip through the door, smiling the way a snake smiles when it's already tasted its prey. Melissa came first. She wore a cardigan the color of spring leaves, her hair neatly brushed, her smile delicate as porcelain. To everyone else, she was the picture of a devoted daughter-in-law. She gripped my hand as if she were clinging to love, but her fingers pressed too hard, leaving a pain that wasn't physical. "Oh, Mother," she whispered, her voice soft enough for the nurses to admire. "You've been like a second mother to me. I can't imagine losing you." The words might have convinced strangers, but I heard the tremor beneath them, not grief, but the strain of performance. Her thumb stroked over the veins of my wrist, the very wrist she had pushed against the air 3 days ago. I forced my breathing to stay shallow, my eyelids to flutter just enough to look weak. Let her believe I was halfway gone. Later, Damien entered. His presence pulled the air tighter, colder. He bent close to me, close enough that I could smell the faint sting of antiseptic mixed with the musk of sweat. "Mom," he said, and the word was weighted, heavy, dragging chains behind it. His lips brushed my ear, and his whisper was poison disguised as confession. "I hope you've learned your lesson. You should never have asked about the money. Some truths are better left buried, like Richard." The name hit me harder than the rocks had. My heart stuttered. My breath threatened to betray me. Richard. He had said it aloud without fear, in this sterile room where a nurse lingered near the monitors, and in her eyes I could see it she had heard. Her pupils widened, her mouth parted, the quiet recognition of someone who has just stumbled into a secret too large to ignore. When they left, the nurse moved to my side. Her badge read INS. She bent over me as though checking the lines, and her whisper was urgent. "Ma'am, if you are in danger, move your finger." It took all my strength to lift one finger, the smallest flicker of life. She gasped. "You're pretending." 3 taps of my finger, slow but deliberate. "Yes." Her face tightened with resolve. "Don't move. Don't open your eyes. I'll get help." And in that moment, hope returned, fragile as glass but real. Someone else knew. Someone beyond Henry and me had seen the mask slip. That night, with the machines keeping time, Henry and I were reunited briefly, side by side in adjoining beds. His voice was weak, but his words were sharp enough to cut through the fog. "Hilda," he said, "there's something about Richard's death I never told you." The room blurred. For 25 years I had carried grief like a stone in my chest. Now Henry's words told me the stone had been hollow all along, and inside it was something rotting. "What do you mean?" My whisper cracked like dry wood. Henry stared at the ceiling, tears gathering in the corners of his tired eyes. The night Richard died, Damien wasn't in his room. I followed him. I saw them at the gorge. They weren't just arguing. They were screaming about the inheritance, about money Richard found missing. His throat closed, his breath rattled. And then, Hilda, I saw it. Damien pushed him. The hospital walls couldn't contain the soundless cry inside me. My son, my youngest, the one who had kissed my cheek goodnight, who had held my hand when I cried at Richard's funeral, who had built his life on the ashes of his brother's grave. He had been the fire all along. I turned my face to the side so Henry wouldn't see the tears flooding my pillow. My world tilted again, not from the fall this time, but from the weight of a truth too cruel to carry. Outside the door, footsteps echoed down the corridor. The sound of the detective's shoes, the murmur of the nurse who had chosen to believe me. The storm of secrets was no longer contained within our family. It was about to break into the world. And I knew then, survival was no longer enough. We had to fight. We had to tell the story Richard never got to finish. Before the cliff, before the hospital, before secrets rotted their way to the surface, there was once a life that seemed whole. I used to believe ours was the kind of family people admired when they passed us in church pews or saw us walking together through the neighborhood on Sunday evenings, and perhaps that was true, at least on the outside. Our home stood at the end of a quiet street where the maples bowed low in autumn, their leaves scattering crimson confetti across our lawn. The front porch sagged a little, but Henry had built it strong with his own hands, sanding each board until it shone with the polish of love. When I pushed open the door each afternoon after teaching at the elementary school, the scent of sawdust floated in from his workshop, mingling with the chalk and crayons that clung to my dress. I loved those simple returns, the way Henry would wipe his hands on his apron, grin through the sawdust and ask, "How were the little ones today?" He always listened, truly listened, as I shared stories of children learning to read or stubbornly refusing to hold their pencils the right way. And later, I would wander into his shop, holding a beam steady while he shaped it into furniture that breathed with the life of the trees it had come from. His rough palms traced delicate lines into oak and pine, turning them into heirlooms. We had 2 sons, Richard and Damien, 5 years apart, yet both pieces of my heart stitched into different cloth. Richard was the golden light of our home, cheerful, steady, always ready with a joke or an eager hand. He shadowed his father in the shop, sweeping sawdust and mimicking each cut of the saw, dreaming of one day designing bridges or houses. Damien was more reserved, often content with his books or the faraway look in his eyes that made me wonder where he wandered when no one was watching, but I never allowed myself to think of favorites. I told myself I loved them both in equal measure, and perhaps I did, yet the house often seemed to tilt toward Richard's laughter. Sundays were sacred. After church, we gathered around the oak table Henry had carved himself, its surface worn smooth by the weight of elbows and the heat of meals shared. I can still hear Richard's voice filling the air with plans: college, engineering, a future of building. Damien, meanwhile, would push food around his plate, silent, his fork scraping against porcelain in a rhythm that sometimes made me uneasy. But I reminded myself, some children are talkers, some are watchers. It was only a difference, not a flaw. Our lives carried a gentle rhythm. Summer evenings found Henry and me walking the trail that circled our small town. The air smelled of cut grass, and fireflies floated like tiny lanterns in the dusk. We spoke of dreams, of the grandchildren we would one day spoil, of traveling to see the ocean we had only read about. Those walks were practice, I thought then, for the long, quiet years of old age we would face together. I never imagined they were practice for the path that would nearly end us. On weekends, our home swelled with relatives. My sisters Harriet and Irene arrived with their children tumbling through the doorway, laughter bouncing off the walls. The women crowded into the kitchen, trading recipes and secrets over pots that steamed and hissed. Outside, the men repaired fences or tinkered with Henry in the shop. Our yard rang with the shrieks of children playing tag, the smell of pies cooling on the windowsill, and the sight of flowers Henry had gathered, still dewy from the morning. After 40 years, he still left them on the table for me, their petals fragile yet stubbornly alive. At night, when the children were asleep and the house returned to quiet, Henry and I sat shoulder to shoulder on the porch. Above us, the stars spattered the sky, familiar constellations we pretended to name. We spoke of retiring someday, of building a smaller home near a lake, of traveling when our bodies were still strong enough to carry us far. Yes, there was a time when happiness wore no disguise, but happiness, I learned too late, can be a clever veil, and beneath it the seeds of tragedy can take root unseen. Even now, lying broken but alive, I can almost smell those Sunday dinners, hear Richard's laugh, see Damien's watchful eyes. The past shimmers so bright that sometimes I almost believe I could step back into it. But then the memory twists, sharp and cruel, because it was in that very warmth that the shadows first began to stir. The oak table sat at the center of our home like an altar, its surface etched with knife marks, faint rings from glasses set down in haste, and the polish of countless meals shared. Henry had carved it himself in the spring of our 10th year together, sanding each curve until it gleamed. I used to joke that it was sturdier than our marriage, and he would laugh, kiss my hand, and say, "That's the point, Hilda. This table will hold us through everything." On Sundays, it truly did. After church, the smell of roasted chicken or beef stew would fill the house, weaving its way into every room until even the curtains seemed to carry the memory of home. The clatter of dishes mixed with the squeals of children. Harriet and Irene's little ones darted through the kitchen like mischievous sparrows, chased by my own grandchildren when they came to visit. Richard had always claimed the seat nearest to Henry, eager to discuss blueprints he had sketched in his notebooks. "I'll build bridges, Mom," he used to say, his voice burning with certainty. Bridges strong enough to last 100 years. His words wrapped the room in hope, and I believed him with all the faith a mother can muster. Damien sat opposite, his fork scraping the plate in slow arcs, his eyes wandering from the food to the window, then back again. He didn't interrupt, didn't boast, didn't share. Sometimes, when the laughter grew too loud, I caught a flicker of something dark in his gaze, as though joy was a language he had not learned. Yet when he did look at me, I made myself smile, because love is supposed to be blind to shadows. The women gathered in the kitchen corner, swapping recipes while dough rose under clean towels. "Add more cinnamon," Irene would insist, wagging her spoon like a judge's gavel. Harriet, with her sharper tongue, teased me about how I spoiled Henry. Still grading his papers after all these years? She would laugh, pointing at the stack of my students' tests Henry dutifully marked while I cooked. I laughed too, but inside I knew she was right. Henry and I had become a team of small, unspoken sacrifices, weaving our days together thread by thread. Outside, the men leaned over the fence, fixing whatever had broken that week. The metallic clang of tools reached us through the open windows, steady and reassuring. The children ran circles around the yard, their voices rising into shrieks of delight, echoing into the dusk like promises of a future still unspoiled. When the meal was finally served, silence would fall, broken only by the scrape of chairs and the murmur of grace. We ate, we shared, we existed in a moment so complete that I thought nothing could fracture it. I looked around that table, Henry's rough hands folded in prayer, Richard's eager smile, Damien's silence masked as calm, Harriet's laughter ringing like bells, and I thought, this is what forever feels like. But forever is fragile. I didn't know then that even as we filled our plates with food and our hearts with love, there were cracks forming beneath the surface. The oak table that had once symbolized strength would one day witness whispered arguments, slammed fists, and silences too heavy to lift. Still, when I close my eyes, I can taste the gravy soaking into fresh bread, hear Richard's voice rising above the clamor, and see Damien's watchful stare. Those Sundays remain a photograph in my mind, warm, golden, unbroken. A photograph that would one day curl at the edges, revealing the darker image beneath. It began so quietly I almost convinced myself I had imagined it. A tone in Richard's voice, a sharp glance from Damien. The kind of things a mother excuses as brotherly spats, because believing in harmony is easier than facing the truth. Richard was 20 then, tall and full of restless energy, his shoulders broadening with the promise of manhood. Damien was 15, still lanky, his voice deepening unevenly, his moods quick to shift like sudden storms. I remember walking past the hallway one evening, carrying a basket of laundry, when I heard their voices low and urgent. "You can't keep doing this," Richard hissed. "I know what you've been up to." Damien's reply was sharp, defensive. "You don't know anything." When I stepped into view, the words died. The silence was so complete it pressed against the walls. Richard forced a smile, too wide, too brittle. Damien ducked his head, his eyes flickering away from mine. Later that night, I asked Henry if he thought something was wrong. He shook his head as he polished his tools. "Boys argue, Hilda. Always have. Always will. Don't turn every quarrel into a tragedy." His calmness soothed me, but only for a while. Because in Richard's eyes that evening, I had glimpsed something more than irritation. I had seen fear. The weeks that followed grew heavier. Their whispers multiplied, their footsteps pacing after midnight, their voices rising, then strangling themselves into silence. When I questioned Damien, he muttered about homework or claimed Richard was just being bossy again. When I questioned Richard, he pressed his lips together and said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll handle it." But I worried anyway. A mother always does. Then came that October night, the night Richard didn't come home for dinner. I remember the stew cooling on the stove, the clock hands dragging past 9, then 10. Henry tried to reassure me, but his own eyes betrayed the storm inside him. By midnight, dread had sunk its claws into me. I knocked on Damien's door. He was at his desk, books open, pen in hand, but his eyes slid from mine too quickly. "Have you seen your brother?" I asked. "No." His voice was flat, practiced, like a line recited too many times. The neighbors joined the search. Lanterns bobbed like fireflies across the dark fields, men calling Richard's name until their voices grew hoarse. At dawn, they found him at the bottom of the gorge. The police said he had stumbled. A tragic accident in the dark. I wanted to believe them. I needed to. Anything else was unthinkable. The funeral came. I wore the same black dress I had worn for my mother's burial, the fabric stiff with old grief. Richard's absence was a hole I couldn't stop falling into. Yet through my tears I saw Damien's calmness, too calm, too still for a boy who had just lost his brother. He stood by the casket with an expression that even now chills me. Not grief, not anger, but something unreadable, like a mask hastily pulled over a secret. That was the first shadow. the night our family fractured. And though I tried to patch the pieces together with love and routine, something had shifted forever. I told myself time would heal us. I told myself Damien's silence was just another form of grief. But deep inside, beneath the comforting lies, a small voice whispered what I refused to hear. That fall into the gorge had not been an accident. The day of Richard's funeral lives inside me like a wound that never closes. October had painted the trees in shades of copper and fire, but I felt no beauty in it. The air carried the brittle scent of fallen leaves, the kind that crumble at the touch, and I thought so quickly life turns to ash. I wore my only black dress, the one I had pulled from the back of the closet, stiff with age and heavy with memory. I had worn it for my mother's funeral, and now, 20 years later, I wore it again for my son. It clung to me like sorrow itself, unyielding and cold. Henry held my elbow as we walked behind the casket, his grip steady but trembling, the way a branch holds snow before it breaks. The church was full. Neighbors, students I had once taught, relatives from towns away, all of them gathered under the vaulted ceiling where hymns rose like questions no one could answer. My sisters Harriet and Irene wept openly, their sobs spilling into the silence between prayers. The pastor's voice echoed, words about God's plan, about mystery, about faith. But I felt only the raw absence of Richard's laugh, his dreams cut short like a candle blown out mid-song. I could not stop crying. My throat burned, my eyes swollen, tears spilling until my body had no more to give. Each word spoken over that coffin pressed me deeper into despair. My heart ached with a mother's impossible wish that I could trade places with him, that the ground would open beneath me instead. And Damien, my surviving son, stood strangely calm. His hands folded, his eyes fixed not on the coffin, not on the flowers, but somewhere distant, unreachable. His face did not crumple with grief. No sob shook his shoulders. He was stone while I was shattering. I wanted to believe that this was his way of coping, that inside his silence was a storm too fierce to show. But now, looking back, that silence chills me more than the autumn wind ever could. After the burial, as earth thudded onto the wooden casket, I clung to Henry. My legs buckled. My cries tore from me until no voice remained. Henry whispered into my hair, "We'll survive this, Hilda. We'll survive." His words tasted of ashes even then, because deep in his throat, I think he already carried the secret he would reveal to me decades later. We returned home that night to a house that no longer felt like ours. Richard's empty chair at the oak table was a void I could not look at. The stew I had left cooling on the stove still sat there, untouched, congealed into a grim reminder of the night he never returned. I remember looking at Damien across the table. He lifted his spoon, silent, his expression unreadable. I searched his face for grief, for cracks in the calm, but found only a stillness that frightened me. That night, as the house grew quiet, I lay awake listening to the sound of Henry's breathing beside me and wondered what silence truly hid. It was the darkest day of my life, and though years would pile upon it, though children would grow and life would continue, the truth is this: part of me was buried with Richard, and it never rose again. After Richard's funeral, the house seemed to sag under the weight of silence. The oak table, once alive with chatter, now held only the sound of spoons scraping bowls and the faint ticking of the wall clock. I thought grief would hollow Damien, strip him raw the way it had stripped me. Instead, he changed in ways that unsettled me, ways I mistook for healing. He became attentive, almost unnaturally so. In the mornings, he rose early to help Henry in the workshop, fetching tools, sanding wood, offering to sweep up sawdust. "I want to keep busy, Dad," he explained with a small, practiced smile. In the afternoons, he shadowed me in the kitchen, chopping onions, carrying laundry, bringing me cups of tea when my hands shook from sudden waves of tears. "You need to rest, Mom," he would murmur, placing the cup before me like an offering. At first, I clung to this new tenderness as though it were a gift from heaven. I told myself it was Richard's absence that had awakened Damien's softer side, that grief had pressed love into him the way pressure makes diamonds. Friends even said how blessed I was. Some boys shut down after tragedy, but Damien, look at him, he's stepping up. I nodded, forcing a smile, eager to believe it. But sometimes, In the stillness between chores, I caught something else in his eyes, a quick flicker, like a curtain drawn over a window too quickly, a tightness in his jaw when he thought no one was looking. It lasted only a heartbeat, then vanished, replaced by warmth that felt almost rehearsed. One evening, as Henry dozed in his chair, I sat grading papers at the kitchen table. Damien slipped in quietly, setting a small bouquet of wildflowers beside me. Their stems were uneven, the petals bruised, but they smelled of open fields and youth. "I thought you'd like these," he said, his smile gentle. For a moment, my chest ached with gratitude. Then I remembered how Richard used to bring me the same flowers on spring afternoons, and the gratitude soured into something heavier. Still, I convinced myself to see only the good. I needed to. After all, what mother can bear to believe that shadows lurk in her only remaining child? I let his attentiveness stitch itself into my daily life, even as unease gnawed at the corners. Years passed. The wound of Richard's death never healed, but the sharp edge dulled. Damien graduated, found work, laughed more easily. When Melissa entered his life, a sweet girl with a ready smile, I thought perhaps God was giving us a second chance. Together they seemed happy. They had 2 children, bright-eyed little ones who called me Grandma and filled our home once again with the music of laughter. Looking back, I see it differently. The attentiveness, the perfect husband act, the doting father routine, it wasn't healing. It was camouflage. Damien wasn't filling Richard's absence. He was burying his own guilt beneath layers of charm and devotion. At the time, though, I believed. I let myself believe. And that belief would cost us more than I could ever imagine. When Damien introduced Melissa to us, I remember the way her presence seemed to soften the sharp edges of his silence. She was warm, with a voice that carried a kind of practiced sweetness, and eyes that sparkled with the eagerness of someone wanting to be accepted. "Call me Mom," she said the very first Sunday dinner she joined, her hand covering mine with an affection that felt both tender and rehearsed. My heart swelled at the sound of it. After all the grief, perhaps this was the thread that would stitch our family whole again. Their courtship moved quickly. Within a year they were married in the small church where Henry and I had once spoken our vows. I watched Damien's face as he slipped the ring onto her finger, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw something genuine, an ember of love, untainted by shadows. The congregation clapped, the organ sang, and I whispered to myself, maybe this is redemption. Not long after, children came. 2 little ones, bright-eyed and soft-cheeked, who filled the spaces Richard once had with a sound of innocent laughter. They toddled across the oak table's benches, spilled juice on the floor, and clung to my skirts calling, "Grandma, Grandma!" Each time they said the word, a piece of my heart mended and broke all at once. I loved them fiercely, perhaps too fiercely, because they reminded me of everything we had lost and everything we still might lose. Melissa slipped easily into our rhythms. She helped me fold laundry, stirred soup while I chopped vegetables, and praised Henry's carpentry with exaggerated delight. "Your father-in-law is an artist," she would say to the children, pointing at the rocking chair he built for their nursery. I wanted to believe her admiration was real, that she truly cherished us not just as in-laws, but as family bound by love. Damien, too, seemed transformed. His business, a carpentry shop of his own, flourished at first. He brought us handmade gifts, frames etched with vines, tables smoothed with polish, toys for the grandchildren. He smiled more, laughed more, wrapped Melissa in his arm like a man proud of his life. To anyone looking in, we were a family redeemed. And for a while, I let myself bask in it. Sunday dinners returned, though never quite the same. Richard's chair remained empty, but now Melissa sat beside me, her perfume mingling with the smell of roasted meat, her laughter filling gaps in the conversation. The children's giggles softened the silence that had haunted us for years. But even then there were moments, a flicker in Damien's eyes when money was mentioned, the way Melissa's questions sometimes lingered too long on our house, our land, our savings. I brushed it aside, telling myself all young couples dream of stability. After all, hadn't Henry and I once counted every dollar, dreaming of a home to call our own? Yes, for a time I believed life had given us a second chance at happiness. I believed the shadow had passed. I believed love could cover what was broken. But happiness built on deception is a fragile house. And I was about to learn that our new family, this picture-perfect portrait, was nothing more than a mask, carefully painted, waiting for the moment it would crack. At first it came wrapped in politeness, in words that felt like care. "Mom, Dad," Damien said one evening, "you're both 60 now. It's important to have everything in order." He smiled as he spoke, his hand resting gently on Melissa's, as though their unity could soften the weight of his request. "We should talk about your will." The air at the table grew heavier than the stew cooling in our bowls. I looked at Henry, expecting him to wave it off, to chuckle and say, "Plenty of time for that." But instead, my husband nodded, thoughtful, even agreeable. Melissa leaned toward me, her eyes wide with practiced sincerity. "We love you so much," she said, stroking my hand. "We just want to make sure you're protected." Her touch was warm, but I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Protection should have felt like comfort. Instead, it felt like calculation. The lawyer we visited was an old friend, Albert, gray-haired and kindly, a man who had watched our boys grow up. He explained the options carefully. A trust for the grandchildren, an even split, or a traditional will. Richard's memory stung as Albert spoke, because Richard had once told me he'd always take care of us. That promise had died with him, leaving only Damien. Damien leaned forward, his tone firm. "It makes the most sense if Melissa and I are the heirs. We'll make sure everything is distributed fairly to the kids when the time comes. And besides," he added, his smile sharpening, "you'll need us when you're older." I forced a smile, but something inside me recoiled. There was weight in his words, a quiet claim that felt less like devotion and more like ownership. Henry squeezed my hand beneath the table, a gesture meant to reassure, but I could feel hesitation pulsing in his grip. That night, Melissa embraced me, whispering, "Now we're officially a united family forever." Her perfume clung to my dress long after she left, and the words replayed in my mind like a hymn sung off-key. Their visits became more frequent after that. At first, it warmed me how wonderful I thought that they want to spend so much time with us, but quickly I saw the change. They didn't come to share meals, to let the children run in the yard, to laugh and sit on the porch. They came with lists, with ideas, with plans. "Mom, you should sell this big house," Melissa suggested, her eyes roving over the furniture Henry had built, her smile sharp as she fingered the wood grain. "You could move into a smaller apartment in town. Less work, less risk." Damien nodded, his voice harder than before. "It's irrational to stay here. If you fall down the stairs, if something happens, we can't help you in time." I tried to explain that every corner of that house held our story meals cooked, laughter shared, children raised, dreams whispered in the dark. But when I looked into Damien's eyes, I saw it the flicker of irritation, the glint of something that wasn't love. Henry began to echo their words softly, as though testing them on his tongue. "Maybe it would be practical, Hilda," he said one night, brushing his teeth. "Maybe Damien just wants to help." But even as he said it, I noticed the shadow of doubt in his eyes, faint but undeniable, and in that shadow my fear grew roots. Our family dinners still carried laughter, still carried the giggles of grandchildren, but beneath it I felt the ground shifting. Their questions about insurance policies, about savings, about deeds and titles, they weren't innocent curiosity. They were tally marks on an invisible ledger, calculations of what our lives were worth. Joy still danced in the house. Yes, but in its corners, shadows gathered, biding their time. It started with suggestions, but soon suggestions hardened into demands. One evening, Melissa stood in my kitchen as though she owned it, stirring tea with a silver spoon she had brought herself. "You know," she said casually, "it would be wise if Damien had power of attorney, just in case. If something happens, everything would already be taken care of." She smiled as she spoke, but her eyes held no softness. They measured me, measured the walls, the photographs, the memories, as though each detail was an entry on a ledger. Damien followed, his tone smooth but firm. "It's only for precaution, Mom. If one of you gets sick or loses the ability to sign papers, we can manage your affairs without complication. It's love, not control." But the word love fell heavy, hollow. It sounded less like a promise and more like a threat dressed in silk. I tried to laugh it off. "Your father and I are still in our right minds. We can manage our own business. For the first time in his life, Damien looked at me not as a son looks at his mother, but as a man looks at an obstacle. His face hardened, his jaw clenched. "Mom," he said, "this isn't about you being capable. It's about responsibility. Family responsibility." The phrase cracked something inside me. Responsibility. I had carried responsibility every day of my life, raising him, feeding him, defending him, burying his brother. And now, with that word, he turned the weight back onto me, twisting it into a chain. Melissa reached across the table, her hand covering mine. Her nails dug ever so slightly into my skin, her smile too sweet. "Don't you want peace of mind? Don't you want to know we'll take care of everything when the time comes?" The tea in my cup grew cold between my palms. For the first time, I felt the walls of my own home closing in. That night, Henry and I argued in hushed voices while washing dishes. "Maybe they're right," he said, his eyes tired. "We're not young anymore. What's the harm in letting them help?" I shook my head, soap suds clinging to my trembling fingers. Help doesn't sound like help when it comes with pressure. Don't you hear it, Henry? He's changed. He's not asking, he's demanding. Henry sighed, avoiding my gaze. "Maybe you're imagining things. Damien's just worried." But then, just for an instant, he hesitated. His hand stilled on a plate, his eyes clouded with something he didn't say, and in that silence, I knew I wasn't the only one who felt the shift. He was trying to bury his unease, the way I had been burying mine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, every creak of the house sounding like a threat. In my mind, Richard's face flickered the son who had once promised to look after us, the son who had never lived to keep that promise. And in that memory, Damien's shadow loomed larger. The pressure was no longer subtle. It pressed down on us with every visit, every suggestion that was not really a suggestion, every smile that didn't reach the eyes. And though I tried to hold on to the hope that I was wrong, deep inside I knew the son I had trusted was beginning to reveal the mask he had worn for years. When fear coils too tightly inside you, the only relief is to let it spill into someone who has known you longer than your secrets. For me, that person was Harriet, my older sister. She had always been sharper than me, less trusting, quick to spot the wolf under the wool. Where I saw the best in people, Harriet saw the cracks. I called her one gray afternoon. My voice shook as I told her how Damien and Melissa had begun visiting us with a new kind of intensity, how their conversations always circled back to wills, to houses, to money. At first she was silent, and the silence cut me deeper than any question could. Finally she said, "Doesn't it strike you as strange, Hilda? Damien has his own business, doesn't he? He never seemed desperate. Why then is he suddenly so anxious to control what's yours?" Her words landed heavy, like stones dropped into water, rippling through everything I thought I knew. "I want to believe it's just care," I murmured. "That he worries about us growing old." But Harriet's voice sharpened. "Care doesn't look like pressure. Care doesn't come with demands. You've always defended him, Hilda, even when you should have asked harder questions. Remember when Richard used to confide in you? When he said Damien wasn't the same? You brushed it off as sibling rivalry. And look what happened. The mention of Richard was a knife. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, my free hand trembling. "You think Damien—" "I think," Harriet interrupted, "that you should start listening to the instincts you've been burying for years. Something about him has never been right. If I were you, I wouldn't sign a thing. Not one paper. Not until you're sure." When we hung up, the house felt darker. Henry was in the workshop, the whine of his saw echoing faintly. I stood alone in the kitchen, Harriet's words looping inside me. My eyes fell on the framed photograph of our family taken years ago. Richard's grin wide, Damien's smile thin. Melissa not yet in the picture. It was supposed to be a portrait of love, yet now it looked like evidence proof that even then one smile had not belonged. That evening, Damien arrived unannounced. He carried his easy charm, the one he wore like a favorite coat, and asked if we'd thought more about giving him legal control of our finances. I looked into his eyes, and Harriet's warning echoed. Care doesn't look like pressure. For the first time, I didn't nod or smile. For the first time, I asked directly, "Why does it matter so much to you, Damien?" The silence that followed was sharp, brittle. He blinked once, and for just an instant, the mask slipped. His gaze hardened into something I had only ever seen in nightmares. cold, calculating, dangerous. Then, as quickly as it came, it vanished. He smiled again, his voice syrupy. "Because I love you, Mom. Because family takes care of family." But Harriet was right, those weren't words of love. They were words of ownership. That night, lying beside Henry, I felt the fragile weight of Harriet's warning pressing into me, a warning I could no longer ignore. It was late when Henry finally told me. The kitchen was quiet, except for the steady drip of the faucet and the faint hum of the refrigerator. We had just finished washing the dinner dishes, our movements slow, heavy, burdened. I sensed he had been holding something back for days, maybe years, and that night the weight of it pressed him into silence until I couldn't bear it anymore. "Henry," I said softly, drying my hands on a towel, "do you remember what Damien was like before Richard died?" He froze, the plate in his hand slipping slightly before he steadied it. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw something I hadn't seen in decades: recognition, not of me, but of the truth he had been running from. "There are things," he whispered. "About Richard's death I never told you." The air thickened. My heart pounded so loudly I feared it would drown his words. I pulled out a chair, sat down, and waited. Henry lowered himself into the chair across from me, his hands trembling as they pressed against his face. "That night," he began, his voice cracking, "Damien wasn't in his room. He told us he was studying, but I saw him leave the house. Something about the way he walked, it bothered me. So I followed. I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles whitened. I found them by the gorge," Henry continued, tears sliding down his cheeks. "They were arguing, screaming. Richard had papers in his hands, bank statements. He discovered that Damien had been stealing from our savings. Small amounts at first, but then larger. He confronted him. Damien denied it, called him crazy, said he was making it up. But Richard, he had proof." My body went cold. The room seemed to spin. "What happened?" My voice was barely a whisper. Henry swallowed hard. "Richard told Damien that if he didn't confess, he would tell us everything himself. Damien lost control. He shouted that Richard was always the favorite, that he always got everything. And then he pushed him." The words shattered me. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to breathe. "He pushed him?" Henry nodded, his face carved with guilt. "It wasn't an accident, Hilda. I saw it. Richard tried to keep his balance, reaching for something, but it was too late. He fell. I felt my soul split in two, one half screaming for my firstborn, the other refusing to accept that my youngest was a murderer. "Why didn't you tell me?" I cried, my voice breaking. "Because when I reached Damien, he was sobbing, trembling, swearing it had been an accident. He begged me not to tell you, not to call the police. He said he couldn't lose me too. And I," Henry's voice faltered, "I believed him. Or maybe I just wanted to. Richard was gone, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing another son." My tears blurred the world. I stumbled to my feet, bracing against the wall. "You let me bury my child believing it was fate, not murder. You let me grieve blind, Henry. You made me live a lie. I thought I was protecting us," he whispered. "Protecting you. Protecting what was left of our family. But I became his accomplice. Every time I stayed silent, every time I turned away from the money disappearing, I made myself part of his crime." I covered my mouth, choking on sobs. The truth had been buried for 25 years, but now it rose, rotting and unstoppable. My youngest son had killed my eldest. And my husband, the man who vowed to share every burden with me, had carried this secret alone until it was too late. That night, as I lay awake in our bed, staring at the dark ceiling, I realized nothing in our lives had been what it seemed. The family I thought I had was nothing but a careful disguise, and the shadows had been there all along. And the worst part, the part that hollowed me out, was knowing Damien hadn't stopped at Richard. Now, 25 years later, his eyes were fixed on us. After Henry's confession, the walls of our home no longer felt like protection. Every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of light seemed to whisper Richard's name, and with it, the truth of Damien's hands pushing him into the void. I thought that secret was the end of what I could endure. But fate wasn't finished with me yet. A week later, I found Henry hunched over his desk in the study. His shoulders, once broad and steady, curved inward like a man carrying stones. Papers were spread before him, the lamp casting harsh shadows over numbers and ink. When he noticed me at the door, he tried to cover them, but it was too late. "What are you hiding now, Henry?" My voice trembled, equal parts anger and fear. He sighed, the sound heavy with decades of regret. Slowly, he slid the papers toward me. Bank statements, letters from suppliers, notices stamped with red ink. And there, at the center, Damien's name. I scanned the figures, my breath catching on every number. Debts. Over $100,000. Damien's carpentry business, the pride he paraded before us, the success he flaunted was crumbling. He owed money to banks, to vendors, and Henry admitted in a whisper, to people far more dangerous than either of us wanted to imagine. "He's been lying," Henry said, his voice breaking. "The shop isn't thriving. It's drowning. He's been stealing again, Hilda. Little amounts from us over the years, just like before. I kept hoping it was temporary, that he'd pay it back. But it's worse than that. He's desperate." I pressed a hand to my mouth, bile rising in my throat. "Does Melissa know?" Henry nodded grimly. "I think she does. She asks questions about the value of the house, about our savings, about the land you inherited. They've been planning, not to save us, to save themselves." My knees buckled, and I sank into the chair across from him. The papers blurred as tears filled my eyes. All those years I'd convinced myself Damien had become better, more loving, more attentive when in truth he had been weaving another web, building a mask so flawless I wanted to believe in it. "He killed Richard for money," I whispered, my voice hollow. "And now he wants to kill us for the same reason." Henry's silence was answer enough. The next day, Damien arrived with Melissa, their smiles bright, their voices honeyed. They brought cookies for the grandchildren and spoke of family hikes, of celebrating our wedding anniversary with a trip to the mountains. To anyone else, it would have sounded like love. But to me, it was a death sentence wrapped in a bow. As Melissa unpacked the picnic basket with practiced cheer, her fingers brushing the very counter where I had rolled dough for my sons as boys, I felt it deep in my bones. The past was repeating. Richard's death had been the first act. Ours was meant to be the second. And this time, Damien wasn't going to rely on chance. He was planning carefully, meticulously, like a man who knew that only his parents' death could buy him another breath of life. It came wrapped in ribbons of sweetness, as though love itself had knocked on our door. Damien's voice over the phone was light, cheerful, carrying the same tone he used as a boy when asking for an extra slice of pie. "Mom, Dad," he said, "your 40th anniversary is too special for just a dinner at home. Melissa and I want to do something unforgettable for you. How about a trip to the mountains this weekend? We'll hike a little, take photos, have a picnic. A perfect family day." Henry sat across from me at the kitchen table when I took the call. I covered the receiver with my hand, and the look in his eyes told me he had heard every word. Terror mirrored terror. His lips barely moved as he mouthed, "This is it." My voice shook, but I forced it into something resembling delight. "That's very sweet of you, Damien. Let us think about it, and we'll get back to you tomorrow." The moment I hung up, silence swallowed the room. The refrigerator hummed. A clock ticked. I stared at Henry, my hands trembling against the table's worn oak. "He wants to take us to the same kind of place Richard died," I whispered. Henry nodded slowly, his face pale. The gorge, the cliff, the perfect accident. That night we lay awake, staring into the darkness, our hands clasped tightly as though the world might steal us apart if we let go. Every plan for our future, the ocean we wanted to see, the smaller home we dreamed of building, crumbled under the weight of a single certainty. Our own son was plotting our death. On Wednesday, Melissa arrived at our doorstep, carrying a shopping bag as though it were filled with love. "Hilda, dear," she said, pressing her arms around me. The hug lingered too long, too tight. "I brought some supplies for Saturday. Fruit, water, cookies, everything we'll need for our adventure." She pulled out a shiny new camera from the bag, her smile glowing. "I can't wait to capture every moment. These will be photos we'll treasure forever." Her words made bile rise in my throat. "Treasure forever," she said. The only photos she intended to keep were of our broken bodies at the bottom of a cliff. Damien appeared behind her, swinging a backpack onto the floor with a thud. "Dad," he said brightly, "I bought all the gear, ropes, harnesses, lanterns, even a first aid kit. We'll be completely safe." Safe. The word coiled around my spine like a snake. That night after they left, Henry sat me down in the living room. His hands shook as he held up his phone. "I'll hide this in my pocket," he whispered. "I'll set it to record everything. If we die, at least someone will know the truth." Tears blurred my eyes. I clutched his hand. "And if we live? Then we'll finally have proof." He reached into his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. I wrote a letter to Harriet. It explains everything: Richard's death, Damien's debts, what we believe they're planning. I hid it with our important documents. If we don't come back, she'll know. We sat there in silence, the house breathing around us like an old friend. Each creak in the floorboards another reminder of the years we had spent building a life here. This home had held birthdays, holidays, laughter, and tears, and now it might also be our tomb. Saturday crept closer. With each passing hour, I felt the noose tightening not around our necks, but around the very heart of our family. The invitation had been spoken sweetly, but its echo was a death sentence. Friday night arrived like the tolling of a bell. The air inside our home was heavy, saturated with the silence of two people who knew tomorrow might be their last sunrise together. Dinner sat untouched on our plates: meatloaf and potatoes I had prepared out of habit, though neither of us could swallow more than a few bites. Even the ticking clock above the stove seemed louder, sharper, reminding us of time slipping away. Henry sat at the desk in the corner, hunched over a small notebook. His hands trembled, the pen scratching across paper with the urgency of confession. When he finished, he slipped the pages into an envelope and sealed it. "This goes to Harriet if we don't come back," he said, his voice rough. I nodded, though my throat had tightened too much to answer. On the table between us lay Henry's phone. He held it as carefully as if it were glass, turning it over in his hands before showing me how he had hidden the recording app in plain sight. "I'll start it before we leave," he explained. "It'll catch every word, every move. If they try something, there will be proof." Proof. The word had become our anchor in a storm that threatened to drown us. Later, I pulled out an old tin box from the cabinet where I kept family keepsakes, birth certificates, photographs, Richard's report cards, even the first love letter Henry had ever written me. I slipped in a note of my own, written with shaking hands. "If you are reading this, Damien and Melissa have betrayed us. They want our lives, our home, our savings. Please protect the truth." I placed it beneath Richard's photo, his smiling face now a silent witness to everything. That night, when we finally crawled into bed, Henry turned to me, his eyes glassy in the lamplight. "Hilda," he whispered, "if something happens tomorrow, I want you to know these 40 years with you have been the best of my life. Despite everything, despite the secrets I kept, I've loved you more than my own breath." I pressed my forehead to his, tears soaking into his pillow. "Don't say goodbye yet, not while we still have a chance." Sleep never came. We lay in the dark, holding hands, listening to the old house breathe around us, both of us memorizing the feel of each other's presence, the warmth, the rhythm, the fragile miracle of being alive together. When dawn broke, the sky was a cruel blue, clear and bright as though mocking the weight pressing down on us. Birds sang outside our window, oblivious to the fact that we were walking into a trap. I dressed slowly, buttoning my blouse as though the fabric could shield me from what awaited. Henry slipped the phone into his jacket pocket, tested it once, then nodded. He looked at me, and I saw not just my husband, but my partner in defiance. We were not going to let our deaths become just another of Damien's lies. The sound of a car horn outside shattered the stillness. Damien's voice carried through the open window, too cheerful, too bright. "Morning, lovebirds. Ready for your big adventure?" I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. Not for safety I knew that was already gone, but for strength, for courage, for the will to face whatever came on that mountain. Henry took my hand, squeezed it once. "Let's go meet our executioners," he said, his tone bitter and steady at once. And together, we stepped out of the home we had built with love, walking straight toward the betrayal that waited in the guise of family. The car ride to the mountains lasted only 2 hours, yet it felt like an eternity stretched taut between every heartbeat. Damien drove with a calmness that chilled me more than reckless speed ever could. He obeyed every stop sign, every speed limit, whistling as if we were heading to a picnic instead of our execution. Melissa sat in the passenger seat, turning now and then to flash us her radiant smile. The kind of smile that would have charmed strangers into believing she was the perfect daughter-in-law. Between the seats, the children's car seats were conspicuously absent. That alone should have been proof to anyone who doubted their intent. A true family trip would never have excluded them. No, this was not a celebration of generations. This was a stage set for tragedy. I kept my hands folded tightly in my lap, my nails pressing crescents into my palms. Beside me, Henry's hand found mine, his thumb brushing against my knuckles, subtle but deliberate. I knew what it meant. He had already started the recording on his phone. Every word, every forced laugh, every slip of truth would be captured. Proof, our last weapon. When we arrived, the trailhead greeted us with deceptive beauty. The trees arched overhead like a cathedral roof, golden light sifting through their branches. The air smelled of pine and damp soil, rich and clean, a cruel contrast to the dread gnawing at my stomach. "Isn't this perfect?" Melissa exclaimed, swinging her backpack over her shoulder. She lifted her camera, snapping photos of Henry and me as if we were tourists. "These memories will last forever." Forever. The word clanged inside me, sharp and ironic. The trail began gently, a winding path softened with moss and littered with wildflowers. Melissa skipped ahead, pointing out every bloom, every bird, her voice bubbling like a child's. "Look at those yellow flowers, Hilda. Aren't they lovely?" Behind us, Damien walked close, too close, his boots crunching deliberately on gravel. "How are you doing, Mom? Need to stop and rest?" His tone was tender, but I felt the weight of his eyes pressing into my back like daggers. After 30 minutes, the path grew steeper. My legs ached, my breath came shorter, and Henry's face turned pale, sweat dampening his temples. Damien knew exactly what he was doing. He had chosen a trail that would exhaust us, weaken us, make us easy prey. "We're almost at the lookout," Melissa chirped, though I recognized the lie. I had seen the map at home. The true lookout was still an hour away. Their plan was nearer, more convenient, hidden behind the mask of Melissa's false cheer. I tried to memorize every detail as we climbed the bend of the trail, the shape of the trees, the sound of the river below, so that if we survived, I could describe this place to the police. Evidence. Landmarks. Truth carved into memory. Henry stumbled once, catching himself on a branch. Damien's hand shot out quickly, steadying him. "Careful, Dad," he said with mock concern. His grip lingered a second too long, his smile twisting just slightly, as if savoring the rehearsal of what would come. Melissa stopped suddenly, pointing to a rock formation that loomed above us. "Oh, look at that view. That cliff is perfect for pictures. Why don't we climb up there for something special?" My blood froze. This was it, the place they had chosen. The cliff rose about 90 feet, its rocks loose, the slope narrow. From the top, the valley spread wide, breathtaking and merciless. One misstep, one push, and the fall would leave nothing but silence. "I don't know if that's a good idea," I said, forcing my voice to sound casual. "That trail looks dangerous for people our age." But Damien was already moving, his backpack heavy with safety gear. He turned, flashing that same boyish grin he had used as a child when he wanted to coax me. "Come on, Mom. It'll only take a few minutes. The pictures will be spectacular." Spectacular. The same word Melissa had used. Their voices braided together, their lies rehearsed 100 times. Henry squeezed my hand discreetly. The phone in his pocket was recording. We had to follow. We had to see it through. Step by step we climbed, the stones shifting treacherously under our boots. My breath rattled, my heart pounded, but I forced myself upward, each motion fueled by the desperate need to outlive the plan my own son had crafted. At the top, the view was indeed magnificent, mountains unfurling into the horizon, the river cutting silver through the green below. In another life, it would have been the kind of sight to etch into memory with joy, but standing there, with Damien's shadow stretching behind us, I knew it was not a gift, it was a grave. The lookout was beautiful in the way a knife glints before it cuts. The valley stretched out below us, the river curling like a silver ribbon, trees blazing with autumn fire. Had we been any other family, it would have been a moment of wonder, but in our family, beauty had always come shadowed with betrayal. "Stand right here," Melissa chirped, waving us closer to the edge. Her camera dangled from her neck, the lens catching sunlight like an unblinking eye. I want the whole valley behind you. It'll be spectacular. Her tone was too bright, her smile too wide. Henry and I moved cautiously, each step deliberate. Behind us, Damien adjusted his position, circling like a predator calculating the perfect angle. Now hug each other, Melissa instructed, raising the camera. Big smiles. Henry's arm wrapped around my shoulders. I leaned into him, but my body stiffened as the earth fell away only inches behind my heels. Melissa snapped photo after photo, the shutter clicking like the ticking of a bomb. One more, Damien said smoothly, stepping closer. But this time, move back a little so the landscape really fills the frame. One step back, just one step, and we would be nothing but a story told in hushed tones. What a tragedy, such a terrible accident on a family hike. Henry's fingers tightened on mine. His phone was still recording. Proof. We needed proof, even if it cost us everything. We obeyed, shuffling back, the gravel crumbling beneath our shoes. My breath caught in my throat. Melissa lowered her camera slightly, her mask slipping at last. Her eyes gleamed, cold and certain. Smile, she said, her voice no longer sweet. This is going to be your last photo. In that instant, Damien lunged. His hands slammed into our shoulders, pushing with the force of 25 years of hidden malice. The ground disappeared. Air rushed past in a deafening roar. But Henry was ready. With a strength I didn't know remained in his aging arms, he twisted, seizing Damien's wrist. His voice thundered across the cliff. If we're going to die, you're coming with us. Time fractured. For one suspended heartbeat, the four of us clung together in a grotesque dance, Henry gripping Damien, Melissa shrieking as she grabbed her husband, me clutching at Henry as the cliff's edge crumbled beneath us. And then we fell. The world inverted. Sky became ground. Ground became sky. The scream of the wind tore through my ears, mingling with Melissa's frantic cries and Damien's curses. Rocks flashed past, gray and merciless. I thought of Richard, his final moments, his desperate flailing in the dark gorge so many years ago, and understood at last the terror he must have felt. The impact was brutal. Pain detonated through my body ribs, snapping, my arm twisting, blood flooding my mouth with the taste of iron. The world blurred, dimmed, narrowed into agony. But through the ringing in my ears, one sound cut clear. Henry's voice, weak but commanding. Hilda, don't move. Play dead. With every fragment of will I had left, I obeyed. A few feet away, Damien groaned, his voice ragged. Melissa, are you? Her reply came broken, gasping. My leg. I think it's broken. Damien, what about them? They're dead. Damien spat, his breath rasping. Both of them. Silence followed, awful, perfect silence. And then Melissa's whisper, thick with satisfaction. Perfect. Just like we planned. I let my body go still, my breath shallow, my eyes half closed. I was pain and blood and stone, but I was also alive. Alive enough to hear their lies, alive enough to one day tell the truth. I lay motionless, every nerve in my body ablaze, every instinct screaming to cough, to moan, to fight. But Henry's command echoed louder than the pain. Play dead. My chest rose in shallow, imperceptible breaths. I let my mouth fall open, my eyes glassy. If Damien so much as pressed a finger to my throat, he would know the truth. A groan carried across the jagged rocks. Melissa. Damien, I can't move my leg. It hurts so much. Damien's reply was guttural, ragged with pain but steady with calculation. Forget it. Don't worry about them. They're gone. Both of them. Gone. The word was a dagger and a gift all at once. Melissa gave a bitter laugh, a sound that chilled the blood in my veins. It worked, just like we planned. At least now, we don't have to pretend anymore. Her voice was soaked with relief, with triumph. The mask had slipped entirely. No more sweet daughter-in-law, no more tender smiles. What remained was truth, bare and poisonous. For a long, agonizing stretch of minutes, they crawled over the rocks, their movements scraping and uneven. I kept my body limp, though every bone screamed. My head throbbed with each of their words, but I drank them in, each syllable another piece of evidence. We'll tell them it was an accident, Damien panted. A rock came loose under Dad's feet. He grabbed Mom and they both fell. We tried to help, but... He coughed, spitting blood onto the stones. We fell too. That's the story. Melissa's voice sharpened. We've practiced this 100 times. We're the traumatized survivors. Poor us, losing our beloved parents in such a tragic accident. They rehearsed the lie openly, certain we were corpses unable to hear them. Their words slid into Henry's phone, tucked safely against his chest, recording everything. Every confession, every slip of truth. As their voices grew fainter, crawling toward higher ground to call for help, Henry's whisper broke through the silence, fragile but alive. Hilda? I wanted to cry out, to clutch him, but I forced my voice to a whisper thin as smoke. I'm here. He exhaled shakily. My leg, broken. Ribs, too. But I'm alive. I'm alive, too, I murmured, though pain lanced through me with every syllable. My right arm burned like fire, my shoulder screamed, but I was breathing, and that was enough. We lay together in the dirt, two broken bodies stitched to life by nothing but will. Around us, the gorge loomed silent, the sky above oblivious. Listen to me, Henry said, his voice taut with urgency. That recording, it has everything. If we survive this, we'll bring them down. If we don't, at least the truth won't die with us. Tears slid silently down my cheeks. After 25 years, Richard will finally be avenged. For the first time since the fall, I let myself believe it. The pain was unbearable, the odds impossible, but proof was on our side. And in that terrible gorge where our blood stained the stones, a seed of hope rooted itself, weak, trembling, but alive. The rescue team arrived before nightfall, their ropes and voices spilling down the gorge like a lifeline from heaven. To the outside world, Damien's frantic shouts sounded like a son desperate to save his parents. To me, each syllable was a polished performance. Please, help them, he cried, his voice cracking on command. It was an accident. The rocks gave way. Melissa sobbed in counterpoint, clutching her ankle, her tears staining the dirt. If I hadn't known the truth, if I hadn't heard their confessions with my own ears, I might have believed them too. But Henry's phone, still recording, carried the weight of reality. Proof that their sorrow was theater, that their love was counterfeit, that their story was murder dressed as tragedy. The medics reached us. I kept my eyes closed, my body slack, playing the part of a woman fading from life. They lifted me onto a stretcher, whispering words of comfort. Henry groaned beside me, his injuries more severe. As the helicopter blades thundered above, I clung to one thought: stay alive long enough to speak. At the hospital, the charade continued. Damien and Melissa stood outside our room, hands clasped, faces carved into masks of grief. We've lost them, I heard Damien whisper to a nurse, his voice trembling. First Richard, now them. How much more can one family endure? But fate turned against him. The young nurse, Inns, had overheard his careless confession at my bedside. She had seen my finger twitch, the silent code of survival. She alerted the doctors, who alerted the police. By the time I opened my eyes, 2 officers stood at my bedside. Ma'am, Detective Johnson said gently, you're safe now. Can you tell us what happened? And I did. Every detail. Richard's death, Damien's thefts, Melissa's calculating questions, the trip to the mountains, the shove at the cliff. My words spilled out like blood from a reopened wound, raw and unstoppable. Henry, pale and broken but alive, handed over his phone. Everything's on here, he rasped. Their plan, their confessions. The recording sealed their fate. Within hours, officers approached Damien and Melissa in the hospital waiting room. You are under arrest, the lead officer declared, for the murder of Richard Black and the attempted murder of Hilda and Henry Black. The shock on their faces was almost comical, Melissa gasping, blaming Damien. Damien shouting, That's impossible, we saw them die. Each word they uttered added another nail to their coffin. The trial came 6 months later. I stood in court, frail but unbroken, and faced my youngest son. I told the jury everything, my voice shaking but steady enough to carry the truth at last. I ended with the only words I had left for him. Damien, you are no longer my son. My boy died the night you killed Richard. What stands before me is only the monster that wore his face. The jury deliberated for 3 days. When they returned, the verdict was clear: guilty of first-degree murder and attempted murder. Damien and Melissa were sentenced to life in prison without parole. Justice, at last. But justice is not healing. Justice does not bring back laughter or undo decades of lies. 1 year later, Henry and I petitioned for custody of our grandchildren. They were innocent, their lives shattered by the sins of their parents. Each night, as I tucked them into bed, I told them about their Uncle Richard, the brother they never knew, the man whose kindness would live on in them. Sometimes, after the children are asleep, I sit at the old oak table, running my fingers along its scars. I think of the meals we shared, the arguments unspoken, the dreams that crumbled. I think of Richard's laugh and Damien's silence. And I wonder how love can twist into something so unrecognizable. But then I hear Henry's voice from across the table, soft but certain. We survived, Hilda, and we told the truth. Yes, we survived. The truth is ours again. Yet the echo of betrayal lingers, a ghost that sits with us at every meal. Because though justice has been served, the wound remains, and I know it always will.